Steve Sider is a professor and associate dean in the Faculty of Education at Wilfrid Laurier University, where he specializes in educational leadership, inclusive education, and global education. His extensive research focuses on how school principals and vice principals support students with special education needs and foster inclusive school environments. Steve has led numerous studies funded by national organizations examining the challenges school leaders face and how they can overcome them. In addition to his work in Canada, Steve has collaborated on education projects in international contexts, including Haiti and Ghana, furthering his understanding of leadership in diverse environments. Most recently, he spearheaded the development of PrincipalBot, an AI-powered chatbot that provides real-time support to school leaders, helping them navigate complex educational decisions. Steve's innovative work in integrating AI into education has gained recognition for offering practical solutions to help new principals manage the demands of leadership, especially in inclusive educational settings. We're thrilled to have Steve on the podcast today to share his insights on educational leadership, inclusive practices, and the future of AI in supporting school administrators.
Welcome to Becoming a Principal, the podcast for aspiring educational leaders. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Matt. Our mission is to inspire and support educators considering leadership roles so they can add value to the communities they serve. Well, today we're talking with Steve Sider. And Steve, we were talking a bit about startup a few moments ago. Tell me, what's your startup like?
That's a good question. Startup looks a little bit different. I work in a faculty of education at a university. So startup, I always think about my colleagues who are in school leadership roles in end of August, early September, as I just remember all the butterflies. And I remember early in my career, I was a high school teacher, asking one of these senior, English department head, like, do you still get the butterflies in your stomach the night before your first class? And he said, 30 years or more of experience, I still get them. And he said, I think it's a mark of, you're eager to make sure you're doing a good job. So I think of, people in the field, end of August, early September, think of those butterflies. I still get butterflies teaching in Bachelor of Education or graduate programs at a university. Some of those startup things are very similar to what you're experiencing. Probably the biggest difference is working with adults, as you can imagine, is very different than working with young people. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that you would be doing as far as your preparation for the school year would be significantly different from what I'm doing. We're not going through class lists, class rosters, right. Looking at students with various special education needs or plans. But still the same things as far as preparing my courses, preparing to teach, having engaging activities, trying to make sure that I'm current with the research that I'm bringing into my classes, and still with a few butterflies.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nice. I like that. It's a sign that you're ready.
I think so.
Right? Don't you think?
Yeah.
Right?
Butterflies every time.
Yeah. Is that right?
Absolutely. Every year presents something new, and I think if you don't have them, there's something about that makes you maybe perform better too. I think.
Yeah.
It's excitement too. Butterflies can equal excitement.
Yeah. I tried it earlier in my career teaching when I got really nervous, especially to start speaking in front of a large group of people. Mm-hmm. When I was trying to, go through that and take opportunities to do that. You just try to tell yourself that that's what those butterflies are. It's just your body being excited, mm-hmm. right? And you're ready to go.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So, Steve, I do have a question. I love hearing about people's journeys, not just into education, but also more formal leadership. So, and what inspired you? I'll frame it that way. What inspired you to pursue formal leadership in education, and how did that journey unfold?
Yeah, that's awesome. Probably like everyone, there's people, right? People in our paths. I always say to people, the closer you get to Toronto, there's the signposts are telling you you're approaching the city, right? You're like 30 kilometers away now, or whatever it might be. And there were signposts on my journey as far as people who were significant leaders. I think of Mr. Smalden, who was my grade 6 teacher. Not a formal leader in the sense of a principal, but certainly a formal leader in the sense of how he represented himself in the class. And Jack Smalden, grade 6, Rose Seton Public School, way back when. Our family had moved relatively recently to Canada. English had not been my first language, but I struggled through all the factors of moving multiple schools over a short period of time. And Mr. Smalden was the teacher who's like, hey, come run with us. We're like, what, run? He's like, yeah, we run every I think it was 3 days a week, 7:30 in the morning. Come to the school. And I'm like, this is really, we're going to run? And that teacher, through just a simple gesture of kindness and an invitation, helped me adjust to grade 6 life, right? So when I think of leaders, I think Jack Smalden. I had a actually cool end to that story was when, after I graduated from Teachers College, so 1992, one of, if not my first teaching gigs was in a different school than I went to grade 6, but same school board, in which, guess what? Jack Smalden was a teacher just around the hall. So what would that have been? 15 years, so like 15 years later. It was a very cool experience, and I got to talk to him about like the impact he'd made on my life. So is that formal leadership? Not necessarily, but he taught me about what does it mean to be generous and kind and authentic, and the power of extracurricular or co-curricular, in the journey of leadership. I can share lots of other examples, but certainly I can think of multiple people, whether they were in formal positions of leadership like a vice principal or principal or the coach of a team, some significant impact on my life, or a person who just was committed to being the best grade 6 teacher. That's what he did for his whole career. Mm-hmm. And it was awesome and powerful, and probably inspired me in some ways to kind of scale that work, right? Like he took that and like he was making impact at 25 or 30 kids, whatever there was in that grade 6 class, and thinking about the impact that a principal, vice principal can have now when there's a staff of 30 or 100 and a school body of 200 or 2,000, right? And just the scale of that is so significant.
Yeah, and that's got to be a common theme for, I think, a lot of us too. We've always had those formal and informal mentors, but we always have opportunities as administrators to be that for somebody too, right? We've seen that, and teachers for students, right? Wouldn't you agree on that?
Absolutely. The follow-up question I was going to ask you there, I've had that experience, the wonderful experience in my career as well, to have been taught by someone and then go be on staff with them, like you just mentioned. And my favorite part of that is that, the legend I built up in my mind was also the same way on the colleague side. I wonder if that was a similar experience. Absolutely. It sounds like it was based on your, but was that like kind of surreal? Like, it was. Hey, this is the guy that got me into it. Now I'm working right alongside him.
Yeah, it was surreal in a way because, as a younger person, as an older person, I'll speak to myself and my own experience. Time freezes, right? So he might have thought of me as this 11-year-old kid, relatively fresh to Canada. And then to have the experience of teaching side by side. But he was a humble person. There was no pretension about, oh, you're still that. No, it was like very much treating me like an equal. In fact, I remember in that school, I won't name the school. In fact, it's no longer even around. But I remember walking into the staff room, and there was the famous story, but this happened to me. Like, there was a chair, and I sat in it, and someone said to me very quickly, oh, just so you know, that's XYZ teacher's chair. And Mr. Smalden talked with me about it later, about like, you know what, don't worry about it like that. So again, now you're no longer the student, now you're the one in the staff room. You're like, oh, there's some of the same games that are being played as a teacher now when I was an 11-year-old kid. But again, to have a person, a mentor, a leader for sure, who was able just to talk me through that, like, don't worry about it, like, it's not a big deal. It's ridiculous, but that was huge, right? Again, it was okay. So this is kind of part of the DNA of what it means to be a teacher, and to have someone. And you two in your roles as informal leadership positions, you're, I'm sure, constantly going through that process of coaching students for sure, but teachers, as far as the what's the process and what makes a supportive school culture, and hey, here's some things that you can do that can contribute to what we're trying to achieve here at the school. So pretty powerful when you have people who come alongside you like that.
Well, it's amazing. What a leadership lesson in of itself. Someone that could humble themselves to not think of you as your 11-year-old self. As a professional. And I would say that in our experience too, when you encounter that, it is special because they're taking you as a professional and trying to guide you without any of whatever they remember from you before, which sometimes might be good.
Sure.
But they're treating you as a professional, and that's amazing. I'm sure it was a wonderful experience. I'm glad you had it.
Thank you.
You got the next one?
Okay. We're going to go a little bit deeper now. Okay. How have you seen leadership change in education in the last number of years since you've been involved? And what opportunities do you think these changes have created because I'm trying to frame it in a positive way,
Yep.
right? Like, how can we use these changes in education to enhance leadership?
That's really good. That's a great question, and I'm going to probably go around that question in a number of ways, and bring me back if I get off tangent. I think the easy answer to that is to say, over my career, so 30 years, I've seen the instructional leader role of a vice principal or principal change to much more of a manager role and dealing with budgets and HR issues and human rights codes and all that stuff, right? Like, so that's an easy answer because that's what everyone talks about. And I don't say that flippantly.
Right.
I realize that to be accurate and factual. But I think there's some things that are, if we're thinking of this from a positive, like, growth mindset kind of perspective, I think there's some things that are pretty cool. Like, for example, Saturday I was with Youth Tech. Now I'm just drawing a blank on the, I think it's Youth Tech Lab. So a group of students in Waterloo who are, 15, 16, 17 years of age, and they're really interested in kind of cutting edge technologies and AI and what can the future be. And so when I see people, school leaders, go to events like that, or I know that the two of you and others are heavily involved with how do we support innovation, creativity, it's like there's a massive opportunity that school leaders have to kind of leverage those, not even just cutting edge technologies like Gen AI, which everyone wants to talk about, but just the mindsets around creativity and innovation and stirring people's kind of fresh approaches so that industrial model of education, at least even if it's only in microclimates, can be flipped upside down. So we can say, what can education look like? And I've been in, in my career, 50 high schools across Ontario and certainly around different parts of the world. And to see the innovative stuff that's being done is really remarkable. How does that happen? It's of course teachers who have brilliant ideas, but it would never happen if it wasn't given permission, or if there wasn't an ecosystem that would say, yes, we want you to mess around, make some mistakes. That's okay, we got your back, but we want to see that we're moving in new, novel, creative, entrepreneurial ways. So easy answer is, we're much more focused on, in some cases, check boxes. But on the flip side, I think there are some really cool opportunities, and it's amazing when you see principals leveraging those opportunities for good for students. Those are the things that I think. Did principals do that 30 years ago? Yes, of course they did. But I think the kind of the plethora, the smorgasbord, the buffet of options is pretty remarkable now, and great to see principals giving space to enable creative teacher ideas. One last thing I'll say, we're all familiar, probably if not just John Hattie, Jenny Donahue's work on collective teacher efficacy. So one of the creative things I've seen principals doing is how do we timetable, so take that industrial model of education, timetabling is part of it, right? We have 75-minute classes or whatever they are here. But being creative and saying, okay, we've got these structures, I got to report to a superintendent, I've got parents, caregivers, family members, students, teachers that there's a level of accountability to, but how can I foster that collective teacher energy, that belief that they can make a difference in students? So even providing opportunities within scheduling or release times or stepping into teachers' classes to say, hey, the 3 or 4 of you, I'm going to carve out some space so you have opportunity to plan together, to think about students in your classes and how can you best serve them. That's creative and that's innovative. And sometimes we're like, it's not any big deal. It's a big deal. Right, you're taking a structure and a bureaucracy that maybe doesn't have a lot of wiggle room for those kinds of things, and say, okay, we're going to work within this to make things happen. Hopefully, that gives you a couple ideas, and happy to pursue any of them.
Yeah, and I think too, I think part of our role is to inspire people, right? So, I think about there's an administrator in our board who, again, he would go and release the teacher, and he would teach that 75-minute class, right? Just to speak to what you're talking about, trying to find ways to get people to connect with one another. And he knew that they needed time at a time when we're really short on release time too. Yeah. So putting himself on the front line, so to speak, or really loving being in a classroom again, I think what he would say, right?
Yeah.
And giving teachers time to connect with one another.
Because at the end of the day, it's about student belonging, it's about student achievement, right? So if we can keep that at the center, then we say, okay, this teacher's got a really cool idea. How can I support that, or how can I ensure that this group of teachers is able to find the space to do exactly that?
Yeah.
I love what you shared there. It really made me think about just the agency that people have in their own spaces, right? So yes, we have these parameters we've got to work within, but there is latitude there to do things, and I think if that should be at the forefront of leaders' minds of what can they do to see the possibilities. And even though we have these structures, like you said, and all these constraints and more managerial tasks, there still exists this opportunity for possibility and innovation. And I feel like as leaders, we need to be aware of that. It's just like teachers. I know some teachers will sometimes ask us for permission to do this or that. Like, yeah, of course, we're like that's our natural leanness to say that. But I think sometimes people don't see the agency they have in their own little space to do a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of great work. So I think that's what you said really spoke to that. So thanks.
Let me add just a quick psychology aspect to this. So in psychology, we talk about self-determination theory, this idea of what gives people agency, right? Like what helps them feel like they are contributing to this collective teacher efficacy, and certainly aspects of that are the competencies they have, but also making sure that others, again, throw another one, Vygotsky, right? Remember Vygotsky from first year psychology or sociology, and that idea, like, how do we help people move beyond what they can do by themselves? That the importance of the coach, right? Why do we have coaches on the basketball court, right? To help us move beyond what we can just do by ourselves. And that's, I think, the role of school administrators is to say, hey, what can I, as a teacher, let me put it as an individual, what can I do? And then having a school administrator say, hey, let's just push that just a notch above. Not so it's way out of the realm of possibility, but just beyond what you, and I'm here to support that process. I think that's powerful.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So just to segue, actually, I feel like this is a great conversation. For those aspiring to more formal leadership, whether that's a program head or a consultant, school administrator, what skills or experiences would you say for them to start stacking would be really crucial for them to start developing those or having those experiences to sharpen their tools?
That's, again, a really great question. I've been using a definition of competency that includes knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So I'll just break my response down into those three. And that idea, that definition of competency comes from a number of educational or quasi-educational organizations like Asia Society, OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So not new to me, just a definition I'm using. So when you think about knowledge, skills, and attitudes, I feel like the first two, knowledge and skills, are not super difficult to teach, right? As far as knowledge for emerging leaders, we have the Education Act, we have all the resources from from Catholic Principals Council of Ontario, or if you're in the public system, Ontario Principals Council. Like, there's lots and lots of knowledge things that we can do. So the skills is a little bit harder to me, right? Like, how do we build the skills for the next generation of leaders? Well, yeah, we can read about it, we can listen to podcasts, but it's probably going to be through experiential learning that we really build those skills. So being mentored, being coached, making mistakes, learning. The third is the one that's most difficult in my mind, is the attitudinal part, the affective, right? So knowledge and skills, we can build on that. How do you help new school administrators or people who are, going up that path, consultants, whatever it might be? The attitudinal part is really, really tricky, especially when we're in a resource-tight temporal period, right? Like where the message is constantly money, 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 or finances, or HR, staffing. So we can, that kind of becomes like a tornado in our minds to say, well, we can't do it. We throw up our arms, and we're like, I guess that's just the way it's going to be. That percolates into our attitudes. So again, how do we take the positive energy of school consultants, department heads, school principals to say, you know what, even in a time of scarcity, that doesn't mean that our minds have to also fit into that, well, this is the box I have to fit in, right? These are the resource box I have to fit in. But to look for creative ways to push the boundaries of that box, or make that box change into a parallelogram or into another kind of shape that might have more space for those things. So knowledge, skills, attitudes come through interactions with with other administrators, other leaders, and seeing things from that asset perspective. How do we work things? It's that entrepreneurial piece, right? That social innovation piece. So hopefully that gets you a little bit of kind of my response on it. The first two, not terribly complicated. The third is, I think, is pretty tough to unpack.
Yeah, interesting.
That's great. I love that, the attitudinal part.
I haven't thought about it that way.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it with that framework, but it makes so much sense. And
think about, like, I'm going to use Matt as an example for a sec, Jordan. Like, Matt's helped us out with this AI tool. When you bring a group of people together, how much time did you volunteer in that project? A couple of hours?
A couple hours,
yeah, it's not a huge amount of time, right?
Yeah.
But you bring a bunch of people, and in that case, it was people from Waterloo Catholic, Waterloo Public, and a few other people, some innovation people, blah, blah, blah. You bring people together, and it's like people are like, oh, hey, right? Not a huge chunk, and it's just a little thing, right? But I think sometimes that's that rubbing shoulders with other people and hearing their creative ideas. I was in a meeting with Waterloo Public principals not too long ago, in which a principal was talking about IEPs, individual education plans, and some creative ways they were dealing with that. And I think about Waterloo Catholic, which had some really creative ways with identification, and forget the identification piece, but how do we support diverse needs of students in your schools without the bureaucratic aspects, the legal and human rights aspects that have to be considered. And I think that's a place where the Catholic school systems across Ontario actually have been setting the benchmark for inclusive education as opposed to special education. It's been subtle, but I think it's been pretty innovative. Why? Because people rub shoulders with each other. How can we do this? What can we do different? How does this work in your school? That's where the attitudinal piece, I think, can grow in a positive way.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I guess my follow-up to that is, how do we create an environment where people are around the right people to nurture that? I guess that's big for me. I notice any professional setting where you're in, if there's people that are speaking negatively about something, it's easy to kind of get into that groupthink. But how do we create an environment where we can put people with these, energizers, I guess?
So we talked just a moment ago about collective teacher efficacy,
right?
Jenny Donahue, John Hattie, they're famous for that kind of stuff. No one is yet trademarked, and
you're doing it right now.
I'm saying this in kind of facetious terms, but no one's trademarked the idea of collective leadership efficacy, right? Yeah. And this is what you guys are doing, which I think is brilliant, right? So collective teacher, we're giving teachers space to plan together, to problem solve. So when we put principals together across different kinds of schools, urban schools, suburban schools, rural schools, northern schools, southern schools, whatever the demographics are, and say, what do you need? What's your problem of practice? And guess what? You've got the collective efficacy, the collective abilities to solve these problems. With all due respect to our consultants and system leaders, they're needed. But most of the problems that occur in our schools can be solved by the people in the schools. So that's collective leadership efficacy. How do we bring principals together, new principals, vice principals, seasoned principals, and use that space and the energy that comes from it to solve the problems of education, rather than always thinking, oh, it's got to be a specialist. Again, with all due respect to system leaders, we need them.
Yes.
But we need to do a better, I think we need to do a better job of equipping, not just equipping, I don't think it's an equipping issue, I think it's just giving time and space for people who are in positions of leadership to just be together. Not for, like, going to tack it on to a meeting down at the board office. Yeah. I'm talking about like a half day or a full day, multiple times, to say that there's, and without, here, I'm going to say it, without accountability.
Yeah.
Internal accountability,
yeah.
But without having to fill in a report or saying we're going to track the metrics of how we were successful by doing it. Just give them time and space. We've moved away from that, right? Because we're so over-programmed that we're at the board office or we're at our school and we're like busy. But giving people time and space, I think, could solve a lot of the issues that happen in our schools.
Love that. You can trademark that. We'll support
it. So we'll support it here first. Okay, so you mentioned earlier, like, I know you have a passion for special education and inclusive education. Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about, because I'm not sure everyone realizes this, and I certainly didn't realize this when I got into the role of a vice principal, how important the role is of a school principal in the lives of these students.
Right. Yeah, it's huge. You can't underestimate that. Like, it is probably, and again, we'd have to look at the evidence to justify what I'm about to say, but I have to believe that big chunk of the effectiveness of a student feeling like they belong, because that's what inclusive education is. Do you feel like you belong, authentically belong in your community school, your neighborhood school, right? That's inclusive education. So I have to believe that one of the most significant factors towards that is the role and influence of the school principal. Yes, teachers have a massive impact. Of course, family members have a massive impact. But principals set the tone, right? They set the tone in their literal words, but certainly set the tone in their actions. So, I mean, I've been in your role. I know that not every child is easy to serve, right? But do we believe, again, it goes back to knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Do we have a belief? Do we have an attitude that does every child actually belong in community schools? Do they belong in community? If we can agree that every child belongs, and they belong in their community to the greatest degree that they want, then we can work backwards from there, right? We talk about backward design. So if that's our end goal, then everything can come from there. And a lot of it has to do with, as a school leader, what do you, like I said, what's your role, what's your influence, how do you create systems of success for teachers so that when they're frustrated, that there's opportunities for problem solving and saying, you know, what can I do to help you be successful today, or what can I do to help you be effective today? I think that those are key pieces. I've done some work with OPC, CPCO, and ADFO this past 3 years. They've had a 3-year project looking at supporting people primarily through PQP1 or PQP2 through their attitudes. And I really like the way that, I think Luciana Cardelli from CPCO was the one who led this, saying let's start with understanding who we are. Before we can start thinking about inclusive education for a child with a disability, a disabled child, or a child with exceptional and special educational needs, start with who we are. And what are our attitudes, what are our beliefs? And if we believe that what is the purpose of schooling, or what's the purpose of education, then we can, and so over 3 years, we did a podcast each year, and now this is the final year in which it's like, okay, now we can talk a little bit more about the knowledge and the skills that you need. If we can start with, what do you believe? Like, what do you value in community? So I wrote a book on this a couple of years ago, and that book is really broken into case studies, and those case studies were based on research we did with 285 principals across Canada, and 45 of whom we interviewed, 7 system leaders we interviewed, to say what are the key pressing points around inclusive education. So of course we all know that some of them would be things like curriculum, programming, transitions, but we also looked at things like success through schooling. And I know that Waterloo Catholic does a really good job with this. I've been so impressed that, you know, for example, not just being in the silos of elementary education and secondary education, but making sure there's smooth pathways between and through, right? So those are the types of things that principals need to be aware of. One of the things that was interesting in the study that we did with these 285 principals, we asked how many of them had any kind of a special education role. So as a teacher, as a consultant, whatever, before they became a school administrator, and it was about 50%. And the 50% who, I'm probably off by a few percent, but the half that said they'd had that experience had really, for the most part, for the good, had really cemented their belief in inclusive education. They're like, I've been in that role. I was in that role for 10 years. I saw some absolute beautiful stories of success. I saw some challenging stuff, but my belief in inclusive education was cemented through that role. The other half, who hadn't had a formal role, of course they had, because they're teachers, they had kids with all sorts of needs, diverse needs and strengths. They were the ones who were, it wasn't like they were negative towards inclusive education, but there was just a lot more questions. Like, I haven't really been involved with, you know, IEP evaluation or whatever it might be. And so for them, it was, they're, I would say in a way behind the other group of principals, not behind in any other sense, except they just didn't have the experience base to draw on for that. So I'm probably going off your question a little bit, but certainly see it, the idea that principals as key, back to my earlier analogy, signposts, pointing the school, pointing the students, pointing the parents and family members, certainly pointing teachers to, this is what we value. We value community, we value diversity, we value voice, we value belonging. We're going to keep saying it, we're going to keep saying it, we're going to keep saying it, but it's not just going to be stop there. You're gonna see it. I'm gonna come into the classrooms. I'm gonna support the students to the greatest degree possible, recognizing that in some cases that's not always gonna work out, with a nice ribbon and bow like we would like it to.
Yeah,
that's amazing. I mean, I think you shared a lot of wonderful things there, but I was reflecting on, as you're speaking there near the end, about the deficit I had coming in as well, and seeing some of my counterparts who have had experience in special education, and it can have a huge impact, I think, if you've had that experience, for sure. And I think maybe Matt would say the same, like he mentioned earlier, that we felt almost like that's where we really need to get up to speed, so to speak, when we got into these roles. Like, that's super important. We want to make sure that our philosophy is, with that backing and understanding that student experience, even though we didn't have that kind of background when we got into the role, but that it is that important that when you take the time to get to understand it really quick.
That's good.
That's important, because I think that's of the colleagues that we've worked with that do have that background, it serves them very well.
The danger in having specialists.
Yes.
Is that we think that's the specialist
That's
job.
right. No, it's not.
And any specialist who's listening to this, we
That's
need
right.
you.
We
desperately need you. But we can't just, what's the expression where you give someone else a response?
You just can't pass it off.
Can't just pass it off. But so kudos to you guys for, we have to, this is part of our DNA now as well, right? So yes, we need the specialist, but we can't just say, that's the specialist job.
Yeah, and I don't know if people realize the amount of hours on a daily basis that you commit to supporting those students.
Yeah.
Right? Like you might not have those, students with the highest needs in your classroom on a regular basis, right? Me as a former math teacher, I did not. But you do commit a lot of hours every day to supporting, or every week, let's say, to supporting those kiddos, and they need you to get up to speed, like as you were alluding to.
Well, you think, Matt, if I can just interject on that one as well, you think about, if we just think about students with invisible disabilities, particularly learning disabilities, by definition, a child with a learning disability cognitively has, if we look at the traditional measure, which is measures of intelligence, they have average or above average measures of intelligence, right? Yes. But where's the deficit, and I'm putting deficit in bunny ears here because, what does that really mean? But where's the disadvantage they have? It's how do they take that mental capacity, that cognitive abilities they have, and turn it into what we as teachers think is presentable work. Right, so even for a math teacher, a physics teacher, a chemistry teacher, recognizing there is probably, just statistically, highly probable that you're going to have kids in your class, even in your grade 11 and 12 U classes, who have learning disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And then how do we support those kids to be successful so that whatever they're going to do post-secondary wise, whatever that might be, that they're being set up for success to the greatest degree possible. The danger is that we sometimes think all those kids in those 4U courses, for all the secondary school administrators out there, they're all like bright, high achieving, university bound, right? And they are, and I'm not gonna say but, I'll say and, they might be working 2 times as hard as everyone else in that class to be able to perform in your 4U course. So again, that I think speaks to, in secondary school context, and I'm speaking as a former secondary school teacher as well, there's a danger, right, in secondary schools where we are specialists, and we think that's not my job. It is all of our jobs to help students to the greatest degree. I keep saying that's the caveat, to the greatest degree possible, be successful, and make sure that they belong. They feel like this is a community that they have something invested in.
Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for speaking on the good work that you've seen from Waterloo Catholic as well. I know that's something that we're proud of. It is part of our, I think, the DNA of the board, and we're proud of that, being inclusive, and making sure students feel like they belong to the greatest extent that we can.
Yeah. So, Steve, I can't have you on here and not talk about the principal bot.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So, can you give a little bit of a background into that? But really, what inspired you to create that? And how do you see that as filling gaps in the resources available to us as school leaders?
Yeah. Okay. So Principal Bot is a chat bot. The idea, I guess, came out of my experience as a school administrator and thinking about my own PQP experience. I redid my PQPs, in fact, I've never worked in the Catholic school system, but I redid them with CPCO.
You did.
Yeah, maybe 10
You
years
were
or
in
so
my
ago.
class.
Yeah, that's right.
When
that's
you were
right.
when you were redoing it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where I first met
totally forgot
Steve.
that.
And I was like, this guy's genius.
Yeah.
What are you doing here? As a joke.
and I did my practicum with Chris Woodcroft over at Res.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was awesome because I got again to see Catholic school system, which
Yes.
I'd always seen kind of peripherally, even if you're in observing students or
Yeah.
whatever. It's peripheral. I haven't worked in a Catholic school system. So, anyways, Principal Bott came out of this recognition that as a new administrator, like how do you navigate, especially in an elementary school, for any of the listeners who are in elementary school systems, if you are the lone principal, right?
Yeah.
No VP.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the myriad of policies, guidelines, PPMs, blah, 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 that you have to know? And at the same time, I'm like, what did we learn in PQP1 and PQP2 that would actually help me? Lots of really good knowledge and building some of those skills, but would help me on I need to know what I'm supposed to be doing now. There was partly that, and then partly my neighbor who's an Air Canada pilot, and I started thinking, why do we have pilots who have this incredibly important job flying 300 people in the air? You're flying 2,000 students, not in the air, but you're giving leadership to them. So why don't we put you in a flight simulator and give you all sorts of practice so that when you walk into the school on your first day as a VP, you've got like hundreds of hours that you've been spending in this flight simulator, right? So that was the idea with this Principal Bott, is to say, how can we give principals really quick access to the dozens and dozens and dozens of of policy documents, and then how do we give them some flight simulator-like training? So Principal Bott has two modes. One is the directory of things, and you can just do a quick search. I need to know what our policy is on applied behavior analysis. I'm just making this up now. Applied behavior analysis or whatever it might be. And then the other is to say, all right, I've got an evening or a Saturday morning. I need to do some training. So I want to have some scenarios that I'm going to try and give like accurate responses to. So that's Principal Bott. We worked with Smart Waterloo Region Innovation Lab. We worked with principals from Waterloo Catholic, Waterloo Public, OPC, CPCO, a group of about a dozen or so. Matt, you were part of that, to kind of fine tune this product. So we ideated, think about the design cycle. We prototyped, and we're still at that prototype stage. So the last cycle of prototyping would have been this past August with a group of about 30 principals that was facilitated through Ontario Principals Council. And now we're waiting to see if we can get some funding. We want this to be open access, so there's no proprietary, aspects to it. So we're waiting for some. We had initial funding from the federal government. Now we're waiting for kind of a second round to see if we've got enough funding to kind of scale it. We've had interest from across Canada, school boards across Ontario. So that's kind of the thought behind Principal Bott. We'll see where it goes.
There you go.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I think I should use that instead of going to ask you, man.
It would have more answers for you.
Nothing like calling a friend.
That's right. Calling a friend is important.
Yeah.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Go for it.
I was going to say, before we kind of wrap it up, so you're expecting that will be kind of utilized, like, is that in Ontario sort of the starting point?
Yeah, and we're not quite sure how that's going to all get rolled out at this point. School boards legitimately have concerns about privacy, data, and so forth. So we have to figure out, right now, everything's open, is like what's publicly available, right? So we don't have internal
documents that you can scan. Okay.
That's right. So we have to kind of work. We've had, as I said, quite a few school boards say, hey, we are really interested in this, but we've got to figure out the security and student identity data. Obviously, we all know is very sensitive. So some of those things have to be figured out first. I'm hoping if we get the next round of funding that by next summer we would have something that would be available, whether it's through school boards or through CPCO or whatever it might be, or maybe it's just individual principals
decide.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Nice. Okay, Steve. Thanks for joining us today.
My
I
pleasure.
appreciate the conversation. We could have gone another few hours on this.
Yeah,
Maybe it'll be a part 2 some other time.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Becoming a Principal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with more stories and advice from the world of school leadership. Until then, keep striving and inspiring.